I remember growing up in church, something they would tell us was, when times are easy, Satan finds it easy to tempt people to stray from the church because they don't feel like they need God. I remember feeling good about myself because I was someone who stayed in the church through the good times. They were actually dead on. Statistics shows that during the economic lulls or emotional hardships, religious attendance spikes a lot. They, of course, are thrilled by this, but they fail to take psychology into account on how to translate this data. One common phenomenon in psychology, which we are all prone to in times of stress, is a concept called regression. When under stress, the mind tends to become less mature, possibly because you're coming across an experience you've never had to deal with before, so your memory is trying to go back to a time when you had a similar problem, and so you keep going back and back till you reach an immature state of mind. I've had this many times during the downturn. At my new job, there were a lot of pressures to get things done in a certain way and on time, and when I would mess up, I would regress and snap at people. I never do this, and once I realized what was happening, and it was pointing out to me what I was doing, I could be a lot more aware of my actions and realize that it was just the stress talking, and I was able to compensate for that, just like when you're drunk, you can remind yourself that it's the booze that's making you think and feel the way you are, and you can function a lot better. The same situation is true for the church. The mind goes back to what to do in situations like the ones they were in, and what they remember getting good feelings off of is church and prayer. Imaginary friends are useful to kids, so the brain goes, hey, I'll try that again. These people never needed an imaginary friend in the first place, but they were never given the mental tools they needed to cope with new problems and understand what the brain was doing. Mother Teresa, along with many other Christian sects, believe, possibly because of this correlation, that suffering is more righteous and a way to get closer to God. So she and many religious people use suffering as a way to keep themselves stressed. Aside from the fact that some people get orgasmic effects from masochism, stress releases the hormone cortisol, which is a fight-or-flight drug, along with epinephrine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. Nerve pathway studies have found that nerves over time will lose their sensitivity to constant stimuli. Think about when you're wearing a watch. At first, your brain is telling you about the new stimuli, trying to make you aware of it, but over time it ignores it, as the brain doesn't need that constant information, only new information, which is why it feels so weird when you remove the watch, because it's now telling you that it's not there anymore. The same is true for most drug interactions. At first you get a rush out of them, but over time your brain registers them as normal, and you need more to get the same effect. This is also called dependence. The study was done on people who get dopamine increases from carbohydrate intake. At a certain point, the brain refuses to give any more dopamine because people were overeating to try and get that drug again. But they keep eating because they were addicted to it. To get it again required taking a break from the carbs and allowing your receptors to become resensitized again. I wonder if this isn't why in church camp and other emotional sessions, people could more easily than I could get that spiritual feeling and sing and cry, then go out the next day going back to doing the same things they were doing. I felt like I was seriously missing out because I couldn't get that rush, as my brain was now desensitized to the spiritual feelings I was constantly giving it. I remember feeling like there was something horribly wrong with me, and perhaps my secret shame of lust might be keeping me from experiencing what they could, which made me feel even guiltier because I couldn't stop what were very powerful natural urges. I later discovered that all these people were doing a hell of a lot more than I was in the area of lust. They just like to say they were virgins for the sake of consensus. Their spirituality was very logical, as the brain will refuse to give them the same emotional drug constantly. Once the rush wears off, they take a break until the next emotional service, once the brain was desensitized, and they could get a serious rush, and look and feel spiritual and godly. They of course had no idea why it worked, or what they were doing. With stress drugs, over time one gets desensitized as well, which makes me wonder if Mother Teresa's doubts later in life were influenced by the fact that no matter how much she suffered, she stopped feeling the same emotional reaction that she used to get. Also, as she got older, she probably figured out more mature mental constructs for dealing with stress, so she got even less of the stress drug for the same amount of stress. As the Christian right knows that recession and stress encourages church attendance and more lockstep thinking as well as more lockstep voting, It makes me wonder if people in the political side of organized religion don't feel like it's in their best interest to keep people stressed. With the C Street Gang, the concept isn't unlikely. Look them up if you don't know what I'm talking about. In Europe, religion isn't nearly as important as it is here. With a 30-hour work week and many benefits, I can bet I know why. Less stress. In the US, where getting a second or third job and still barely getting by is considered common, and religious belief is nearly 87%, perhaps we can learn something from this correlation. The church actually has it backwards. People don't need God, but stress makes them act immature and think they do. Psychology and adult coping mechanisms would be much better for them, and they probably wouldn't have the stress later on down the road. Instead, the church wants them to depend on Jesus, or they won't need the church later on. This is, of course, not true of all churches, but these types are becoming considered less and less useful as their patrons either give up religion or switch to a more addicting one.